You were trained to be liked, not real. It started long before you could name it. A frown from a parent, a snide comment from a teacher. That one time you shared your weird little art project and someone laughed, not with you, at you. That's when it clicked. Authenticity is a liability. Better to shrink, smile, nod, and for the love of Jung, never be too much. You learn to perform kindness instead of feeling it. To say I'm fine when your soul was cracking like cheap tile. To keep peace not because you had peace, but because confrontation felt like death. And maybe it did once. Maybe when you were young, being rejected was a kind of death, the death of safety, connection, or being touched on the shoulder just to know you were still here. This is what Jung meant when he said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because accepting yourself means breaking the contract. The silent, invisible contract you signed in your childhood home, in your school hallways, in every social media comment thread where being liked became your currency for survival. It's not your fault. The modern world runs on performative likability. LinkedIn bias, curated vulnerability posts, even the way you answer, how are you, in a Zoom call, most of it is armor-stitched from fear. We all learn to code switch emotionally. You don't cry too loud. Don't rant. Don't say no unless you soften it with an emoji. But here's the cost. Your nervous system never gets the memo that you're safe now. So it keeps tap dancing. You read the rune. You dilute your words. You say haha no worries when someone's clearly crossed a line, because the only thing scarier than being disrespected is being disliked for calling it out. Historians still argue whether medieval court jesters had more psychological freedom than today's Instagram users. At least jesters got paid to perform. And it's not just external. You've internalized an audience. Even when you're alone, you imagine how they would react to your choice. Would they approve of your outfit? Your decision to quit that job? The fact that you've been ghosting your mom's texts for 2 weeks because your mental health's on a spiritual cleanse? This is the shadow Jung spoke of, not a monster lurking in the dark, but the parts of you exiled to keep you palatable. Your rage, your raw grief, your erotic hunger, your mystical weirdness, banished to make room for something digestible. Here's the kicker, people-pleasing isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment in drag. Let that sink in. You're not noble for sacrificing your peace to maintain someone else's illusion. You're terrified. And that's okay. Fear kept you alive, but it won't make you whole. Real kindness. It begins when you stop lying about how much something hurts. When you stop laughing off the disrespect. When you realize that being the bigger person too often means becoming a doormat with a PhD in empathy. There's a term for this, fawn response. It's a trauma pattern. You appease to avoid conflict. You perform to feel worthy. And it feels like love, but it's a hostage negotiation with your own boundaries tied to the chair. So what now? You get honest. Brutally, clumsily honest. Start with the mirror. Admit what you've suppressed. That you're exhausted from being agreeable. That you're secretly angry. That sometimes you imagine what life would be like if you just didn't care who liked you anymore, and the thought feels like a vacation you can't afford. But you can. That version of you, the unbothered, real one, is not a myth. It's just buried under years of applause addiction. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So call it out. That inner child scanning for disapproval. Hug them. Then gently remove the MIC from their trembling hands. They don't have to be in charge anymore. You do. And maybe, just maybe, you start practicing micro-rebellions. Say I don't agree even if your voice shakes. Wear what feels like you, not what matches the Pinterest board. Cancel plans without guilt. Block the energy vampire. Be boring. Be honest. Be weird. Let someone down if it means lifting yourself up. And when the shame comes knocking, because it will, don't fight it. Just nod. Smile. Say, I see you, but I don't serve you anymore. Dark humor moment. You're basically a haunted house, decorated on the outside to attract attention, but full of ghosts who just want to be seen and released. Give those ghosts a voice, or better yet, give them a YouTube channel. Because here's the real flex, being unshakably real in a world that profits off your performance. And if someone doesn't like that version of you, good. That means you're doing it right. Your inner villain isn't evil, it's starving. You know the one. That version of you you've been hiding under charisma, logic, or humble self-deprecation. The one that daydreams about storming out of a meeting mid-sentence. The one that whispers, burn it all down when your phone lights up with a text from someone who's already drained your last emotional spoon. You call it selfish, petty, dramatic. But Jung called it something else, the shadow. Not because it's bad, but because it lives in the dark, out of your conscious light. And like anything starving in a cave, the longer you ignore it, the more ravenous it gets. We tend to think of villains as people who laugh while monologuing next to lasers. But in psychology, your villain is the part of you that finally says what you've repressed, unfiltered, uncensored, and honestly kind of relatable. It's the version of you that's done being diplomatic. That's sick of swallowing rage and calling it patience. That's tired of clapping for others while you're hemorrhaging your own joy. Historians still argue whether ancient rituals that exorcised demons were actually attempts at shadow integration, externalizing the unacceptable parts just to feel sane again. Maybe those wailing villagers weren't possessed. Maybe they were just finally saying what no one let them say out loud. Your villain isn't evil. They are just malnourished, fed a diet of shame, forced politeness, and spiritual bypassing. You've locked away your anger so tightly you forgot it's just fire that doesn't know where to go. And envy. It's not proof that you're a terrible person, it's a compass. A signpost toward what you secretly crave but were told you didn't deserve. Let's play a little game. Who's the person you can't stand? You know, the one who makes your blood pressure do jumping jacks just by existing. Good. Now ask yourself, what trait of theirs are you denying in yourself? Spoiler, your shadow often shows up wearing their face. See, your psyche wants integration, not exile. The parts you bury don't die, they bench press in the basement, waiting for a weak moment to burst through. That's why your breakdowns feel theatrical. You weren't fine and then suddenly not fine. You were unexpressed for 327 consecutive days and then someone cut you off in traffic. Ben. Apocalypse. What if, instead of suppressing the villain, you invited them in? No, not to run the show, but to talk, to be heard, to tell their side. That part of you that fantasized about quitting everything and living in the woods. That's not sabotage. That's an unmet need for stillness. The one that gets jealous of your friend's new life. That's not bitterness, it's a blueprint for your next chapter, if you're brave enough to read it. This is shadow work, not slaying the dragon, but realizing you are the dragon, and also the knight, and also the helpless village being burned down because someone skipped therapy. Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And yeah, you've done the absurd. You've overworked, over-apologized, overachieved, and overanalyzed. All to avoid a simple truth: the parts of you you're most ashamed of are the exact parts you need to survive what's coming next. You know what real confidence is? It's not a pep talk or a power pose. It's being on speaking terms with your villain. Knowing what triggers them, what soothes them, and when to let them drive, slowly, with a learner's permit. And yes, it'll be messy. You'll overcorrect. Maybe you'll snap a little too hard, or take a boundary too far. That's okay. You're learning the difference between integration and indulgence. Between listening to your villain and becoming them. Dark humor moment. Imagine you're in a critic as a wine mom with a clipboard, your shadow as a biker who smirks in the rain, and your true self as the exasperated therapist trying to mediate. That's your inner committee. Dysfunctional, sure, but honest. Here's your homework: pick a moment you felt something inappropriate. Envy, rage, smug superiority. Instead of judging it, ask it, what are you trying to protect? What aren't you getting? What's your job in here? You'll be shocked. These ugly feelings usually have more loyalty than your nicest traits. They don't want to ruin you, they want to defend you. They just never learned how to speak without yelling. So give them language. Write it. Scream into a pillow. Scribble curses on paper and burn it under the moon if you're feeling extra. But get it out. Make the unconscious conscious. Feed the parts you've starved respectfully. And when someone says you've changed, smile. That's the villain getting their first real meal. Because you don't need to be a saint. You just need to be whole. Emotional detachment not equal to cold-hearted, it's precision. You've probably heard it before: wow, you've changed. Translation: you stopped offering your emotional buffet to anyone who walked in off the street. You stopped volunteering for the emotional Hunger Games. You stopped making your soul a suggestion box for people too lazy to deal with their own lives. And suddenly, you're the villain. Again. But let's get something straight: emotional detachment isn't apathy. It's not the glazed-over eyes of someone who's given up. It's the sharp gaze of someone who finally sees clearly. It's not a shutdown. It's a filter. When you detach emotionally, it doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped bleeding out for people who bring paper cuts to a gunfight and expect you to patch them up while smiling. Jung said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." Now read that again, but imagine it as a clapback at every text you didn't reply to this week. Solitude isn't isolation. It's tuning the frequency back to yourself after years of being jammed by everyone else's noise. And let's be real, a lot of what you used to call connection was just trauma bonding, or guilt bonding, or I'm afraid of being alone, so I'll orbit this chaos bonding. You weren't emotionally available. You were emotionally leaking. Historians still argue whether early monastic vows of silence were acts of divine devotion or just socially acceptable ways to say, I'm sick of you. Emotional detachment, when practiced consciously, is not indifference, it's precision. It's knowing where you end and someone else begins. It's feeling a wave of drama roll in and deciding, not my tide pool. It's choosing which fights are sacred and which are just ego theater with overpriced tickets. Picture this: you are in a conversation. Someone is baiting you. They are fishing for your outrage, your defensiveness, your need to explain. And instead, you go quiet. Not the silent treatment, just silent awareness. You observe. You breathe. You don't take the bait. That's not cold. That's power. Let me be clear, you're not above emotions. You just no longer see them as commands. You can feel the anger rise without building a monument to it. You can feel sadness without asking it to rewrite your whole personality. There's a phrase I want you to carry: just because it moves through you doesn't mean it owns you. You were taught that caring is loud, that love is sacrifice, that empathy means carrying other people's pain like it's a fashion statement. But the real revolution: loving quietly, caring with boundaries, showing up without being consumed. Here's the trick: emotional detachment isn't about becoming robotic. It's about precision emotional investment. You don't throw your soul at every situation like a clearance sale. You allocate, you choose, you discern. And yes, some people will hate this version of you. The ones who fed off your compliance, the ones who called you too sensitive right after weaponizing your vulnerability, the ones who only loved you when you didn't love yourself. Dark humor moment. You're not heartless, you just stopped offering free Wi-Fi to every emotional parasite in the neighborhood. Passwords have changed. Customer service is offline. Your chakras are under renovation. You may notice a strange side effect of emotional detachment: peace. But it's not the spa day kind of peace. It's unsettling at first. Like when the refrigerator hum suddenly stops and the silence makes you feel like the universe has paused mid-thought. You'll sit in that stillness and wonder, shouldn't I be doing something, fixing something, pleasing someone? And then, slowly, you realize, no, not everything needs a response. Not every wound needs your bandages. Not every sadness is yours to cradle. You don't owe everyone access. Especially not the people who treat your presence like a vending machine. Insert problem, expect empathy, kick when nothing comes out. So how do you practice emotional detachment? Start by noticing where your energy spikes. Whose name sends your gut into tight spirals? That's your cue. Build delay into your reactions. When your boss says something condescending, don't respond immediately. Let the silence bloom. The discomfort isn't your emergency to resolve. Try this script: I understand you feel that way. Not I'm sorry. Not let me fix it. Just I see it. That's emotional presence without emotional labor. Learn the sacred art of not replying. Not everything deserves a rebuttal, a defense, or even your attention. Sometimes the bravest thing you can say is nothing. And if you feel guilty for this shift, good. That means you're detoxing. Guilt is often the withdrawal symptom of overfunctioning. Remember this: you can't save everyone, especially not by self-destructing politely. When you emotionally detach, you give others back their dignity. You trust them to carry their own weight. You stop editing yourself to earn love. You become clear, sharp, and grounded. You stop being easy to manipulate and start being deeply, inconveniently real. Because cold-hearted people aren't detached. They are just numb. But you're learning to feel everything and still choose peace. That's not cold. That's holy. Awareness hurts before it heals. The first time it happens, it doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like betrayal. Like the universe yanked off your rose-colored glasses just to laugh at how tightly you were gripping them. You notice things. Sharp, ugly things. How many of your relationships are built on performance? How often you smile while secretly grinding your teeth? How long you've tolerated crumbs and called it a feast? And worst of all, you notice yourself. You catch the little manipulations, the passive-aggressive silences, the way you laugh too hard at jokes you hate just to keep the peace. You see how you use "I'm just tired" as a smokescreen for "I'm spiritually bankrupt and emotionally hungover." Awareness doesn't hold your hand. It shows you the mirror at the worst possible moment, like 4K Ultra HD lighting in a gas station bathroom. Congratulations, you're awake. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And awareness. That's your soul, waving awkwardly from the corner of the room like, hey, we need to talk. You thought awakening would feel like bliss. No. It feels like grief, a quiet funeral for the version of you that needed to be liked more than they needed to be whole. And yet, there's beauty in the breakdown. Because when you see, you can choose. Historians still argue whether the oracle at Delphi's "Know thyself" was divine advice or just ancient sass. Either way, it still hits. Because knowing yourself, really knowing, is a spiritual gut punch. You have to admit you've been the villain and the victim, the saboteur and the savior. Duality isn't poetic, it's personal. Let's talk about the side effects of this awareness drug, shall we? First, you become weird. Like, why doesn't she react anymore? Weird. Like, why is he so calm while everything burns? Weird. You start losing interest in gossip, small talk, and performative empathy. You start craving silence the way you used to crave attention. It's unsettling. You're becoming the kind of person who pauses before answering, who doesn't rush to fill awkward spaces, who lets conversations die when they stop being nourishing. Congratulations. You're now too much for shallow people and not enough for chaotic ones. That space in between. It's called freedom. Second, you feel lonely. Awareness strips away the scaffolding, the social rituals, the trauma alliances. You look around and realize most people aren't ready to meet you where you're going. They like the old you, the agreeable one, the reactive one, the emotionally flammable one who kept the drama interesting. Now you're boring. In the best way. Dark humor moment. It's like you've quit a toxic cult and suddenly the group chat is quiet. No more invitations to the chaos potluck. No more updates about drama you no longer pretend to care about. You used to be the main character in their soap opera. Now, you're off the air. And it's delicious. But let's not sugarcoat it. Choosing awareness means choosing pain. You start to feel things you've numbed for years. You cry more, not less. You grieve people who are still alive. You mourn the childhood you never got. The safety that never arrived. The love that only existed as a fantasy. It's tempting to run. To spiritualize it. To slap a positive affirmation on the festering wound and call it growth. But that's not awareness, that's avoidance in glitter. Real awareness. It sits in the mess. It listens. It stops blaming the world and starts asking, what did I allow? What did I believe? What am I still clinging to that's hurting me? And slowly, painfully, something shifts. You stop arguing with reality. You let people be who they are, not who you hoped they'd become. You give up the dream that your mother will suddenly say the right thing. That your ex will have an epiphany. That the apology will ever come. You let go. And in that letting go, you find your power. You become emotionally bilingual. You can say, this hurts, and still not chase. You can feel the sting of rejection without translating it into self-hate. You can witness your anxiety not as a failure, but as a loyal alarm system that just doesn't know the war is over. Here's the paradox. Awareness makes you softer and stronger. You cry more, but you collapse less. You feel more, but react less. You become a walking contradiction, open-hearted and boundaried, deep feeling and deeply detached. You start to enjoy your own company. Not in a Netflix and chill kind of way, but in the wow, I'm actually not annoying myself anymore kind of way. You clean your space not for Instagram, but because your nervous system deserves beauty. You speak less because your silence has weight now. You're no longer performing. You're being. And yes, it costs you. It costs you the roles you used to play, the pity you used to earn, the false safety of being the fixer, the sweet one, the one who always understands. It costs you everything that wasn't really yours. But what you gain? You gain your spine, your clarity, your sanity, because now, when someone crosses a line, you don't explain. You don't rage. You don't write long paragraphs hoping they'll get it. You simply know. You see the gain and you leave the arena. Awareness isn't just a state of mind. It's a posture, a quiet strength that says, I'm not here to win you over. I'm here to be free. And you are. Ego death in the grocery aisle. It always happens in the dumbest places, doesn't it? Not on a mountaintop, not during some sacred retreat in Bali, no. Ego death shows up at the self-checkout line when the machine screams, unexpected item in bagging area, and you realize you're about to cry. Not because of the machine, but because everything is too loud and you're holding oat milk like it's the last thread holding your life together. That's the real terrain of awakening, fluorescent lights, rude strangers, and moments where your sense of identity buckles under the weight of, is this it? Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, not perfect. And wholeness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives when you let the old masks disintegrate in public, quietly, while someone behind you sighs loudly because you're taking too long to bag your avocados. Ego death isn't glamorous. It doesn't wear white linen or chant under the moon. It wears pajamas you've had for 7 years. It looks like canceling plans without a 3-paragraph apology. Like watching people misunderstand you and letting them. Like telling your family no for the first time and sitting in the silence that follows like a monk in an emotional tornado. It's terrifying, but it's freedom, because the ego isn't just arrogance. It's identity. It's your idea of who you should be. The good daughter, the patient boyfriend, the always available friend, the helpful coworker who never says what they actually think in meetings. You don't just grieve ego death, you grieve who you thought you had to be to survive. And that grief, it sneaks up on you in Target, in the shower, during lunch. It's unceremonious, sudden, a crack in the facade, then a flood. You're sitting in your car crying about a text that shouldn't hurt, but it does, because you're realizing the version of you who would have replied immediately is gone. Historians still argue whether ancient rites of passage involved ego death or just elaborate hazing rituals with better costumes. But one thing is clear, modern society skipped the initiation phase. Nobody tells you that growing up means burning parts of yourself you once loved. Here's the brutal truth: when you stop caring what people think, you start losing things. You lose the version of you they liked. You lose invitations to events where you were only tolerated. You lose conversations that were built on your silence. You lose relationships that required your self-abandonment as the entry fee. And in their place, a holy kind of emptiness, an echoing room inside yourself where something truer can grow. Let's talk about the everyday moments where ego death plays out. You say no and the person you've always bent for gets quiet. You don't fill the silence. You let it hang. You resist the old urge to contort. That's ego death. You walk away from a fight without explaining yourself. You stop texting first. You let them believe what they want. That's ego death. You stop oversharing to earn closeness. You let things be misunderstood. You let people go. That's ego death. Dark humor moment. Ego death is like cleaning out your emotional garage. Halfway through, you're surrounded by junk you didn't know you owned, wondering why you've been emotionally hoarding expired beliefs and ex-relationships since 2009. And yet, there's relief. Because on the other side of ego death is neutrality. Not numbness, equanimity. You walk through the world a little slower. Not to be dramatic, but a person who no longer flinches at disapproval. That's dangerous. In the best way. You speak plainly now. You're not cruel, but you're not sweetening the truth with 12 disclaimers either. You can say "I don't want that" without explaining your entire emotional curriculum. You're not chasing closure. You're choosing clarity. You start to feel untouchable. Not because you've armored up, but because there's nothing left to prove. You're not performing. You're not trying to win the invisible game of being the best version of yourself for others to applaud. You're just here, awake, breathing, real, and you know what's wild? You still care. You care deeply. You feel more than ever, but you've stopped offering your tenderness to people who treat it like a disposable napkin. You've realized that caring and self-abandonment are not synonyms. You've realized that being misunderstood is a small price to pay for being authentic. You've realized that ego death is less about annihilation and more about composting, letting the dead versions of yourself fertilize what's next. And what's next? You, as you are. No mask, no performance, no begging for approval like a well-trained show dog at a spiritual obedience class. Just you, sitting in the grocery aisle, oat milk in hand, crying a little, but free.